So hello everyone and welcome back to another vlog. I had this idea that I could probably get away with photographing one tree for every day of the week in this local park that I'm in now. There are obviously hundreds of trees in this park, so it would be very easy to be able to shoot one tree for every day of the week anyway. So I thought this would be a good option, and also I don't have a huge amount of time. So I was trying to just get out and get a few photos because I was just desperate to get out. I've had a week sitting at home in front of a computer screen doing Microsoft Teams meetings all week, and it's been a right bore. So I'm just glad to get out. So today was a bit of an exercise in getting out and blowing away the cobwebs, as they say. Now I've got a couple of trees behind me. You can see the camera just there behind me, and I'm focused in on these here. There's a tree there and another tree there, and just behind this tree there's another round tree as well, which is quite interesting, and it's these two trees here that are capturing my attention. So I'm trying to capture a shot. It's a portrait orientation shot because there's quite a lot of height in this one, and my shot is these two trees here, this one and this one, making up the subject matter of the image, and then in front of it I've got all of this grass here, which is quite interesting as well. So I've focused on an area on the grass to make sure that's in focus, but I've also focused on this tree here and then this one as well. So I've got three different focus points here, and the idea is to just capture all of that in focus. I'm shooting with the widest aperture I can, f4, with an ISO of 200 because there's not an awful lot of light at the moment. It looks like it's quite bright, but the light's quite flat, so I'm kind of having to really work with the light and try and force it a little bit. So I've got an ISO of 200 and I'm shooting with a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second, which makes for quite an interesting image. I'm using the 70-300mm lens on this one, but I've just noticed just behind me there's another tree that I can get a little bit closer to, which is far more interesting. If I turn around and see if I can pick it out for you just here. He says, let's have a look around and see what I can see. There it is. So just around here somewhere. I can't find it now as I'm turning around, but it's around here somewhere along here, and it looks a little bit round, and it's quite a low tree, and there's some light green colours on it rather than the darker greens that you see all around me, and it makes quite an interesting subject for a composition. And I've only just noticed that while I've been taking this image that I've taken. So I'll show you those two images now. I think I've managed to find it now. It's this tree behind me just here, and with it kind of standing in front of this larger tree behind it creates quite an interesting backdrop to it. So I think I'm going to try and photograph this here. This is my subject, the smaller tree, but with the larger tree in the background because it gives me that interest, that depth. So with that shot, that second shot, both of those trees are quite close together, so I've managed to drop down my ISO to 160 rather than 200, and I've also shot a bracketed image where I've shot at f8 because I've got that shorter distance between the two subjects, and that's given me still a little bit of separation in the image, but it's also meant that there's slightly more of the image in focus. So when I'm focused on the front tree, it means that the back tree is also in focus, and some of the grass in front of the two trees is also in focus, which is a little bit better than trying to capture three separate images where I've got three different focus points. In this situation I've got a much larger depth of field, so I can capture slightly more in focus of the image. So that's important really. And what I've done here is I'm shooting this at about 100mm because of where I'm standing, and it looks pretty good. I hope you like it. I also forgot to mention that with that last shot I decided to bracket the exposures as well. I was at f8 with a base exposure of 1/125th of a second, but I also shot one shot at 1/60th of a second and one at 1/250th of a second. So there was one stop either side of the base exposure, and the idea with that was there seemed to be quite a lot of contrast between the shadow areas and the highlight areas, so I wanted to try and capture that as well, and the best way to do that is to bracket the images. Anyway, as I started to move on and tried to make a walk around to find the next tree, I've actually walked past the tree that I was just shooting, and from this angle it might look even better. There's quite a lot of branches, silvery branches, on the top of the tree canopy, just on that single tree, and they're creating quite a nice interesting contrast with the, I think it's a willow tree, so with all the green of the willows hanging down, that looks quite interesting. It may not be a willow tree, but it's fairly similar. You've got a similar kind of shape and style, so I'm not absolutely certain if it is a willow, but it certainly looks quite interesting. And it's the fact that you've got those silvery branches on the top of it which are just sticking out, which is quite interesting. Almost looks like, you know, those medieval monks that were bald on the top and had hair all around the side of their head. It kind of looks a little bit like one of those. That's what it reminds me of anyway. So I think I might capture a shot of that here as well, and then see if I can find another tree. Now I've come back to this tree here behind me. I've taken photos of this tree on several occasions, often at different times of the year, and it's always very interesting because the tree is quite gnarly and the branches are quite gnarly, and there's always something interesting to capture around that tree. But at the moment it looks a little bit dark. Now what I quite like about it is the branches here that come out the side of the tree and across the path there, and believe it or not, that behind me is a path that just runs underneath this tree and around the side of it. So I want to try and capture that. But what I've also noticed is that with it being summertime and the summertime growth has taken over, this growth here, all of these weeds and flowers, meadow flowers, have taken root, and basically they are hiding the tree from where I want to be. I would ordinarily like to shoot the whole of this tree and capture the root system at the bottom of the tree, but you can't really see that properly with this particular composition. So what I'm going to try and do instead is just concentrate on these branches and use this tree as a frame for one side of the image, and on the other side where you can see the foliage just poking into the side of the image there as well, that will also be a frame on the other side, using the branches of the tree as the main subject here, and even this branch here at the top can also act as part of the framing of the image. So I'm going to set up that now and give that a shot and see what happens. I had to break out the 17 to 40mm lens for that image, and I was shooting at around about 31-32mm because it seemed to be the best crop for that particular image. It looks quite interesting, but I've bracketed the exposures once again because, as you can see behind me, there's quite a bit of highlight area just inside where the behind the branches. That's the light of the day streaming in from behind the tree and backlighting the tree. It's making things a little bit difficult because it's creating really sharp highlights that I don't really want. So I've had to bracket the images, bracket the exposures, and hopefully I can bring the exposure of those highlight areas down by doing that. But also I may even be able to work on the highlight areas with the darkest exposure anyway, and just work on the highlight areas themselves and then combine the images together. So we'll see how that one goes. Right now though, I want to move on because I'm standing here about 100 yards from a little brook. There's no wind and it's reasonably warm, so of course I'm getting midges all over the place and I'm getting eaten left, right and centre. But also I keep hearing bumblebees everywhere I turn, so I'm a little bit concerned that I might be disturbing a few nests. Anyway, I'm going to move on and see what else I can find now. I've walked about 100 yards, probably not even that, from where I last was. Got away from those stingy bitey buggers that were attacking me, and just behind me, I don't know if you can tell just there, there's a conjunction of two paths. I've come up this path here and there's a path that goes along behind me just there, and I'm standing on another path which leads up through this little cutting here, and just in the middle of this little cutting what I've found is a group of trees where it looks as though there's been a couple of large tree branches that have come down and they've been stood up to make this triangular effect, probably to kind of try and create some sort of den within this little bit of woodland here in the park. It's an interesting one, but you've got trees all around it as well. There's a tree just at this side and then there's another tree just at this side and some trees just behind, and there's quite interesting light coming through the trees, through the tree canopy. So what I'd like to do is try and capture a shot of that. But also while I'm here, I've also noticed that just at the other side of that other path, just behind me, there's another tree there which is also very gnarly. There's probably a little bit more light on it, and it's a tree that I've photographed a couple of times before from different positions and different angles and so on, and at different times of the year. And it's quite an interesting one. I'd like to try and capture that as well now. So I reckon that will be, this one here will be number 5 and that one behind me will be number 6, and then I think I'll only have one more image to capture after that. Just every so often, walking around this park, I'm noticing the odd individual sapling like this one behind me, probably planted within about the past 5 to 8 years or so, and obviously it's there to ensure that we are still planting trees. So I quite like the look of it, but it's kind of silhouetted against the grey sky here. You can't really tell on this video, but the clouds behind that tree have got quite a bit of detail and contrast in them. So what I might try and do here is make a shot here where I've got this tree, this little sapling here, as the only interest really. All those trees in the background, that line of trees in the background, don't really matter too much. They're just kind of an also-ran for this picture. But I'm interested in the shape of the top of this sapling and the clouds around it, so I'm going to try and see if I can capture something there. This may be a long exposure as well. Like I said earlier, we've got no wind at all, so it could be quite easy to capture a long exposure of this and get some real drama in those clouds. So I'll give that a go now. So I'm about to show you all the kit that I've had to use to set up the camera lens just to take this particular shot, because it's taken me about 10 minutes to set up and capture this shot, but I've finally got one that I quite like. I'll show you how the camera looks first, all the kit that I've used to do this, and then I'll show you the image afterwards. So the camera setup is the camera itself on the tripod with a 17 to 40mm lens, and as you can see at the front of the camera I've now got a little bit of a cage sitting on the front of the lens. That cage there basically is a holder for the graduated neutral density filter, and you can see that in the front just there. That filter is a graduated neutral density filter, and what that does is it reduces down the light of the sky but keeps the exposure correct on the foreground and the land. Behind that cage then there is also a 10-stop neutral density filter, and that allows me to produce a very long exposure, so I get all that movement in the clouds and the drama and everything that's going through. The only way I can do that is to lengthen the exposure time, but when I do that, obviously I also overexpose the image, so to ensure that I'm bringing down the exposure again, I then have to filter out quite a lot of that light, so I use that 10-stop neutral density filter for that. And then behind the 10-stop neutral density filter you can see an ultraviolet filter. Now I wouldn't normally use that, there's no real reason for it at all, it's not actually doing anything for the image, but the reason I'm using it is purely and simply to keep the front element of the lens in good condition. Whilst I've got an ultraviolet filter on the front of the lens, no dust or dirt can get into the lens and cause any damage to the lens, so it's purely there as a shield really for the lens, but it doesn't really do anything. And then obviously you've got the lens behind that and the camera set up behind that. So as you can see, to set up one shot with all that equipment on the camera has meant that it has taken me some time to make sure everything is set up perfectly and make sure the shot is the right composition and I've got everything in focus, and all of that has taken a few minutes, and then I've opened the exposure, started the exposure and let that run for a minute, and I've got what I think is a decent image. This is going to be the last image of the day, so I hope you like it. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you again on another vlog very soon. Bye for now.